Welcome to this YSL Excel VBA tutorial. This video is going to give you a quick look at how to access Outlook email events from your Excel VBA projects. This video has actually come about as a result of a question somebody asked on the previous video on working with Outlook in Excel VBA. They wanted to know how you could detect whether an email had been sent or just simply discarded. Now, I don't often get a chance to create videos as the answers to questions that people ask simply because it's so time consuming, so sorry if you feel left out if you've asked a question and I haven't made a video to answer your own questions, but this one felt like it was kind of worthwhile doing because it gives you a couple of nice techniques that we haven't covered before in previous videos. So we'll start with a really quick recap of creating emails in VBA using the Outlook object library. Then we'll jump straight into creating a wrapper class module that's going to hold a reference to our email object and make it possible to access the events of that email. And we're going to do that by using the with events keyword. So once we've done that, we'll have a look at how you can add code to the email events so that something happens when a user either sends the email or closes it down, and then we'll look at how you can record whether the email has been sent in a simple worksheet. So quite a bit to do here, but it's kind of an interesting technique, so let's get started. Let's start with a quick recap of the basic code that we need to generate a new email. So I've started a brand new blank Excel workbook, saved as a macro-enabled workbook, and from here I'm just going to head straight to the Visual Basic Editor and insert a new module. I'm not going to bother renaming mine, but you're welcome to if you like. We'll create a quick subroutine in here called something like Create New Email, and then it will help a lot if we have a reference set to the Microsoft Outlook object library. That'll help us with some code writing with the IntelliSense, etc. So if I head up to the Tools menu and choose References, and from the list that appears I need to scroll all the way down to find Microsoft Outlook. Now the exact version number that you'll see will depend on which version of Office that you have installed. So I currently have Office 2016 installed, so I've got Microsoft Outlook 16.0 Object Library. Make sure you place a check in the box next to that library, then hit OK, and that'll give us a bit of help when we start writing the code. The first line of code I'm going to write is going to declare a variable that will hold a reference to the Outlook application. So I'm going to call mine OLApp and say that that's an Outlook.application. The second variable I'll have will hold a reference to the email we'll create. So I'm going to say something like dim m, give it a nice short name, as an Outlook.mail-item. I now need to create a new instance of the Outlook application, so I'm going to say set OLApp equals new Outlook.application, and then finally I can create a new email by saying set m to be equal to, and I'm going to use a method of the Outlook application called createItem. So I'll say OLApp.createItem, and then the specific type of item I need to create is going to be, of course, an OL mail item. Having done that, we can set up a few very basic properties of the email and display it on screen. So let's use a with block just to avoid having to write the variable name multiple times. I'll say with m, and then I'll add in the end with. Then we can head up into the middle of this with block and say things like, well, let's first of all display the email on screen. So I'll say .display, and then we can set the to property. So I'll say .to equals, and then we can fill in some sort of imaginary email address. Let's say, I know, someone at somewhere.com. I hope there isn't actually anybody with that email address, but I'm going to assume that there isn't. And let's set the subject, which will be something very, very basic as well, like test events, although we're not at the events stage just yet. And then let's set a bit of body text as well. So let's say .body equals dear someone, and I think that will probably just do for the time being. Okay. Of course, the previous video on Outlook emails went into a huge amount more detail about things you can do to generate the emails, but just to give this one a very quick test, first of all, if I just run this procedure, I ought to end up with a nice basic test email on the screen. So the next job now is to start getting to the stage where we can detect the events of this email. Okay, so the next step in getting access to the events of our mail item is to create a basic class module that's going to act as a wrapper for it and provide us with access to its events. Now, we've created a separate video as part of this series that goes into a hideous amount of detail about how class modules work. So here we're just going to touch on the absolute basics. The first thing we'll need to do is insert a class module into the project, and you can do that in a similar way to inserting a regular module. So right-click somewhere inside the project and then choose Insert and choose Class Module. It's then a good idea to give your class module a sensible name, so we're going to be referring to this in code a bit later on. So rather than calling this class 1, let's change its name so that it's called something like Owl Mail. Not that sensible name after all, but it's definitely better than class 1. Now, the idea behind creating a class module is that you can then declare variables which use this class as its type. So back in a regular module, if I switch back into module number 1, the idea later on is that we'll be able to declare a new variable rather than as an outlook.mail item. We'll be able to say dim m as an owl mail. And then rather than saying set m equals to and then create a mail item, what we're going to do is say set m equal to a new owl mail. So that will create a new instance of our owl mail class, which doesn't really do anything as it stands. So the next job is to start adding some basic code into the owl mail class that's going to give us access to the events of that mail item object. The first piece of code I'd like to add to the class module is a couple of variable declarations that will give us access to an Outlook.application and an Outlook.mail item. So what I'm going to do here first is delete the line that creates the new instance of an Outlook application, and then I'm going to cut to the clipboard the line that declares the variable for an Outlook application. So I cut that to the clipboard with Ctrl X, and then switch back to my class module. I can then paste in the variable that I've just cut. I'll make a couple of changes to this declaration as well. Rather than using the word dim, I'd like to explicitly state that this is a private variable, just to make it clear that this one shouldn't be exposed to any code in a regular module. I'd also like to make this an auto-instancing variable, so that rather than having to explicitly say when to create a new Outlook application, that will happen automatically whenever we reference the OLAP variable. The second variable we're going to have is one that gives us access to a mail item, and I'd like to make this one public, so I'm going to declare this one as public, and to give this a sensible name I'd like to see this in my regular code, so I'm going to call this one email. I think that's a fairly descriptive name for the variable. So public email as an outlook.mail item. Now what I would like to be able to happen is when I decide to create a new instance of my owl mail class, so back in my module number 1, when I say set m equals new owl mail, I want to make sure that that automatically creates a new instance of Outlook and creates the new mail item and sets a reference to that mail item in this variable here. So to do that, I can access one of the two events of a class module, the initialize event, and that's triggered automatically whenever this thing happens. Whenever a new instance of a class gets created, it triggers the initialize event. So back into the class module, to access the initialize event, I can click on the drop down arrow at the top left first of all and choose class, and that will give me the event that I want, class initialize. The only other event available is the terminate event, so you can select that if you wanted to from the drop down that's at the top right. I just need the initialize event, and all I'm going to make happen when this event is triggered is to say set email equals OLApp, and that will automatically instantiate the Outlook application variable, create item, and then in some parentheses there say OL mail item. So essentially we're just doing exactly what we've already done in a regular module in a somewhat more complicated way. If I just switch back into module number 1 now, and just to finish this off, what I can do here with my with statement is say with m dot, and that will provide me with access to my email property. So my OwlMail class has a single property called email, and that subsequently has all of the properties of a mail item. So if I said m.email dot, you'll see that that has properties and methods of a regular Outlook mail item. So what we're doing here is just essentially causing a lot of extra work to replicate something that we've already done in a simpler way. But this is just the first step, remember, on getting access to the events. If we just give this one a quick test at this point to make sure that one works, if we run that subroutine, we ought to end up with, one more time, a new email in exactly the same way that we've just seen it. So the next step is to get access to the events of that mail item object. So we've just seen how to access the basic event of a class module. If I switch back to my OwlMail class, we use the drop down list at the top left and the top right to select the item we were interested in, so in this case the class, and then the specific event we wanted. So there are just two for the class module. I want to essentially be allowed to do exactly the same thing for our email variable. So to make that work, what I need to do first is declare this email variable with events. So it's going to be public with events, and that's sufficient to add an item to this drop-down list at the top left of the window. So if I click on the drop-down list now, you'll see I get an item related to the name of the variable that I've just declared with events. If I select email from the drop-down list, it's going to automatically provide me with the default event handler for that type of object. So the default event that's associated with a mail item is the open event. You'll see a list of all of the other events for an email or a mail item now in the drop-down list at the top right-hand corner. So if I wanted to make something happen when either somebody sends the email or closes the email, I should find that there are events in this list specifically for that purpose. So if I look for the close event, I can just select that one from the drop-down list, and that will generate the close event handler. And then while I'm here, I might as well select the send event handler as well. So let's select send there too. I don't really need the open event handler, so I can happily just delete the code associated with that with no problems whatsoever. And then what I can do is add any code that I like to these two event handlers that will be triggered automatically when our mail item is either closed or sent. Now, just while we're at the basic testing stage, I don't want to do anything particularly dramatic. All I'd like to establish to begin with is that these events are being fired at the appropriate time. So to do that, I'm going to use the debug.print statement. So for each of these two events, first of all for the close event, I'm going to say debug.print, and then I'm going to say something like owlmail was closed, and then I could probably tag on a call to the now function, which will give me the date and time at which that happened. And then I can do something very, very similar, and in fact, let's do this here. If I just copy and paste that same line, and then say owlmail was sent. Okay, so when these events are triggered, what that should mean is that in the immediate window, and if I display the immediate window by choosing View, Immediate Window, or pressing Ctrl and G, I'll get a little bit of information printed out about what happened. Now there is one more change I'll need to make to the code in the regular module. If I switch back into module number 1, and then have a quick go at testing this code, if I were to execute this, and then I'm simply going to close down the email once it's been displayed. So if I just choose to close it, that will fire the close event of the email. If I choose no, I don't want to save any changes, but I don't get anything printed into the immediate window as I was expecting. The simple reason for that is to do with where we've declared our owlmail variable. We've declared it within the scope of a subroutine, so as soon as this subroutine ends, this variable goes out of scope, and that means that the instance of our owlmail class is destroyed as well, so I can't access the event of that owlmail that we've created. So the simple solution to this is just to move this variable to be declared within the scope of the module, beg your pardon. So if I declare it as either dim m as owlmail or private m as owlmail, then that will be sufficient so that when I run the code the next time, and again I'm just going to close down the email this time, but what we should see this time, if I choose no, I don't want to save any changes, is that I get this information printed that owlmail was closed. If I just wanted to check that that was going to happen as well, if I sent the email, just to prove that it does, if I run the subroutine again, and then if I click the send button, you'll see that I get two lines printed out this time. So the sent message was printed first, and then owlmail was closed was printed. So in sending an email, it automatically triggers the send event and then the close event. Okay, so now that we have the absolute basics working, it's worthwhile thinking about some of the things that might go wrong. So let's have a quick look if I were to run this subroutine to generate one email, and then before I do anything with it, before I send it or close it, I'm going to head back and I'm going to create another new email. So if I run this one again, it's going to generate another separate email object. Now, if I were to go back to the first one that I've created, and I were to close that window down, I'm not going to bother saving my changes, but if I look into the immediate window, I'll find that nothing's been printed there. If I switch back to the new or the second email that I created and then close that one down, and again I'm not going to bother saving the changes, but that one will print out a piece of information. So it's possible if I were to run this subroutine more than once that I end up with an email that's essentially detached from its events, because I'm using the same variable each time. Each time I run this subroutine, it sets m to be a new owlmail object, so the reference to the original one is lost. So what can we do about handling that sort of situation? Now, one fairly basic way to deal with this sort of problem would be to write an if statement that checks if m refers to something when we first begin the subroutine. So the basic if statement that would do that would look something like if not m is nothing, then, and give myself a couple of blank lines and write end if. So if m currently refers to an owlmail object already, we can tell the user that they already have an email to deal with. So something like message box, you have an email to deal with. I'll spell deal properly. and then maybe show a VB critical symbol to make it look a little bit more official. And we should maybe bring that email to the front as well so the user can see it clearly and do something with it. So just a bit of convenience, we'll say m.email.display, which will bring it to the front. And then we should make sure that we definitely don't proceed with the rest of the procedure. So let's say exit sub. So whenever m already refers to something, that will mean that this subroutine will automatically end and tell the user to deal with the existing email. Now this is only currently half a solution, because although we can test whether m is set to be a reference to an OWL mail object, we currently don't have any way to set m to be nothing again. We would like to make sure that whenever we send or close the email object or the OWL mail object, that our m variable gets set to nothing. So to make that work, what we're going to do, this is a little bit rough and ready, but it will work. If we change the dim statement here to a public m as OWL mail, that means that it can be referenced by code anywhere in this project. So what we're going to do, in our OWL mail class module, whenever we send or close, well, as the email will be closed whenever we send it anyway, we can add a simple line to the end of the close statement that will say set m equals nothing. I'll spell nothing properly, I've got a random space in the middle of nothing there. So, I'll just space this out a little bit so it's a little clearer and cleaner to read. So, having done that, if I were to head back to module number 1, now I want to make sure that when I run this for the first time that I don't actually have a reference to anything stored in my m variable. So one way to test if that's the case would be to view the locals window, and then I can step through this procedure using the F8 key. If I use the F8 key, I can then expand the module 1 object, and I'll see that m currently is set to nothing. If m didn't say nothing here, if it did have a reference to an object already, then you could make sure it was definitely set to nothing by using the immediate window. And you can do that by writing an instruction, so I can say set m equals nothing, and then hit enter, and that will execute that instruction and make sure that that variable is then cleared. Okay, so having established that, what I can now do is run this subroutine once, and I'll end up with an email object. If I attempt to run this subroutine again, without having dealt with the original one, I'll get told that I have an email to deal with, and when I click OK, that email should be brought to the front, which it is. And if I try to do that again, I will be told the exact same thing. If I deal with this in some way, either by sending it or closing it, sending closes it automatically of course, the next time I run this subroutine, it will indeed generate a new email. So that basic system works reasonably well at this point. So I can run this and get a new email, but if I try to run it again with an email already in place, I have to deal with that one first. Now there is another potential problem with the system as we've written it so far. If I were to run this one more time, and then when I get the email displayed, I'm just going to move it out of the way so you can see the point at which the close event is triggered. If I choose to close down this email, I don't know if you can see down at the bottom here that I've already triggered the close event and it's executed some code in there. After my code has been executed, it then displays this dialog box asking us, do I want to save the changes? And there's a cancel button on there, which if I click, will leave this email displayed, but has triggered the close event technically. So that's also set m to be equal to nothing, which means if I go back to my code and run this subroutine again, even though I still have this email displayed on screen, the original one up here, I've now got a new one as well. So if I were to go back to the original one, that one has been dissociated from its original reference. So if I were to close this one down now, or indeed choose to send it, it doesn't really matter which of the two I choose to do, but the important thing is you won't see any hint that the events were triggered. So if I were to close down the second email that I generated and just choose no, I don't want to save it, you'll see that I get the event triggered for that one instead. So we need to think of some way to handle that sort of situation as well. One way we could handle this problem is to replace the default dialog box that appears if I choose to close down the email with our own custom dialog box, which only gives the user a choice as to whether to close the email entirely or to keep it open. So the user won't get the chance to cancel that. So what we'll do is first of all head back to the class module, and I need to be able to detect, I think to make the system work properly, I want to be able to detect whether or not the email has been sent when the email close event is triggered. There's little point in writing out OWL mail was closed after the email has been sent already. I think it's sufficient to display the message that OWL mail was sent. So if I've detected that the email has been sent when the close event is triggered, I just want to abandon this event entirely. So to make that work, what I can do is declare a variable at the top of the class module, but I want to make it private so it's only accessible within the class. I'm going to call it something like mail sent, and I'm going to make the data type of this boolean, which means it can be either true or false. Now the default value of a boolean variable is false anyway, but I want to make that explicit. So I'm going to use the class initialize event so that whenever I create a new email, it assumes that mail sent equals false. What I can then do is whenever the send event is triggered, I can set the mail sent variable to be equal to true. So I can say mail sent equals true. And then what I can do in the close event is I can write a simple little if statement at the top that will say if mail sent, then exit sub. So whenever the mail has definitely been sent, it won't do anything with the close event whatsoever. I can just get on and write the code that I need to use to handle this new dialog box. So let's use a basic message box to determine whether the user wants to close or keep the email open. We'll have a variable at the top of this subroutine first of all, so I'm going to say something like dim close and discard as a VB message box result. And then after I've determined whether the email has been sent, I'm going to write a statement that's going to say close and discard equals message box, and then ask the user what they would like to do. I'm going to ask them close and discard. Fairly simple question. And the important thing here is that I only give the user a choice of yes and no buttons. So I can say VB yes no without the cancel button. So VB yes no, and then it's probably worthwhile also displaying some kind of warning symbol or a question symbol at least. Let's go with VB exclamation to display the warning triangle symbol. What I can now do is check which button the user has clicked. So I can use another if statement below this to check if close and discard equals VB yes, then I know that I do indeed want to close down the email. Now, in order for that to work, I want to make sure that the email gets closed down without displaying the prompt to save the email, which is the one we're trying to avoid seeing in the first place. So what I'm going to do is refer to my email variable. So I'm going to say email dot close, and then there's a single parameter of the close method that determines what to do when the email is closed. I can either prompt for a save, which is the default, or save it automatically, which I don't want to do, or just discard it entirely. So I'm going to say OL discard. I still want to print out the message about that the email has been closed and when that was done, and I still want to make sure that the email is set to nothing as well if it has indeed been closed. What I then want to do is to make sure that the rest of the event isn't triggered ordinarily. So remember that this code here is triggered before any of the standard code happens. So this is triggered before the choice to save or close the email is displayed. I want to make sure that if I've clicked no, that I don't want to close down the email, that this event is cancelled. And you'll see that the close event has got a cancel parameter, which is a boolean value again. So I'm going to say cancel equals true. So I want to stop closing down the email. And then I want to make sure that the rest of the subroutine is exited from, just in case I add any more code below this one. So I'm going to say exit sub and then say end if. So at that point, let's just give this system a quick little test. If I head back to module number 1, and then I can run this subroutine once, and I can choose to close down the email, and I should find that when I do that this time, you'll see a little indication that Excel is flashing there. It needs some input. It says close and discard. So if I clicked the yes button, that should mean that the whole email is closed down with nothing happening. If I run the subroutine again, and I'm going to close down the email again, and I should get prompted again. Excel isn't flashing this time, but it's there. The message box is still there. Close and discard. I'll choose no this time. So you should see that this time that the email is still visible. So if I were to run my subroutine without closing that email, just to check that everything's still working, I still have an email to deal with, so I can click OK. So I can deal with that, and then I can choose to close it, and then I can tell Excel what to do. Close and discard, yes. An annoying number of message boxes to click on, but the system is gradually getting better. One other little thing that we do need to do based on the system that we've just put in place is to make sure that if we run this subroutine and then we do send an email, so I'd actually send this one this time, and then run the subroutine again, I'll find that I already have an email to deal with. Which isn't actually the case, of course. If I hit OK, I'll get a runtime error because the rest of the code can't execute. So I'm just going to hit end at that point. Now the reason that's happened is back in the class module, is that we chose that if the mail was sent, then we exited the subroutine entirely. So we didn't get a chance to set m to be equal to nothing. So we need to make sure that we've added a similar line to the email send event. So let's say set m equals nothing there as well. And I'm just going to make sure that I've set m to be equal to nothing explicitly in the immediate window, and then switch back to module number 1, and then run that subroutine again, and again I'll choose to send it. I really do hope there's nobody with an email address of someone@somewhere.com, otherwise they're going to be really upset with me after this video. So if I were to run this subroutine one more time, I'll see that this time the email appears properly, and I can close that down, and I get asked, again annoyingly hidden behind the window, whether it's to close or discard the email. So I'll choose yes, close and discard it, and then everything should now work properly. So each time I run this one, and if I try to run it again when there's already an email to deal with, I can't. And if I choose to close it down and I find my little message box, and I'm going to choose no, and then if I choose to close it down again, and this time go back to Excel and choose yes, and then finally everything all works, apart from that annoying little message box hidden behind the email window. It would be quite nice to avoid our email from obscuring the yes/no message box that appears, so we could add a couple of basic lines of code to the class module just to make our system a little bit more user-friendly. So if we switch back to our OwlMail class, what we'd like to do before this message box asking the user about closing and discarding appears, we want to make sure that first of all we minimize the email window. So to do that, we can refer to the email variable and then use a property called getInspector, and then a property of that called windowState. If we set that to be equal to OL minimized, that'll mean it goes down to the bottom of the screen. So you know how to minimize a window, so we just minimize the window just like so. What we will also need to do to make this work, annoyingly, is to make sure that the Excel window then gets activated properly. Otherwise the message box tends to appear behind the Excel window. So to make that work, what we're going to do is use a method called appActivate. Now the appActivate method requires the title of the window that you're trying to activate, and that of course is going to depend on the name of the window you're working in. So the caption of my window, the name of the window that I want to activate, is book1.xlsm-xl. Now rather than writing that out explicitly and then having to change it should I then modify the name of the workbook later, what I can do is easily refer to the caption of the application. So if I refer to application and then refer to the caption property, that should bring it to the front. Last little thing to do is if we were to click no, that we did not want to close and discard the email, we might want the email to reappear again. So in the else clause of our if statement, we can just do the usual thing and say email.display. So just to give that one a quick test, I suppose to test it properly we should head back into Excel rather than testing it from the VB editor window. And from the developer tab we can quickly choose the macros button here and then double click the create new email macro to run that one. So if I choose to close down the window, I should be prompted with my message box that pops up, close and discard. If I click yes, the whole thing just disappears. If I were to do that again and double click the create new email procedure and then close it down and choose no this time, my email should reappear. Click it again, it should reappear each time, but then if I finally click yes, the whole thing disappears. I suppose I should also test that if I run it I can send it as well. So if I double click to create a new email and then actually send it this time, the whole thing should disappear, and then I should be able to run it again with no problems and choose to close it down, and there we go, the whole thing seems to be working reasonably nicely. Okay, so now that we have the core part of our system working, I guess the one thing that will make it useful is to replace our debug.print statements with some lines of code that will actually write useful information to a permanent location. So rather than just writing out to this temporary immediate window, we've got a variety of choices for places we could send this information. If you've watched the videos in the rest of this series, you'll be aware of several different choices we have here. I guess the simplest for convenience would be to write data into our Excel worksheet, but we could also choose to write code that generates a log text file stored somewhere, or even connect to a database and use insert into statements to write data to a database. I think just for simplicity's sake, and because we already have videos that explain how to perform all those techniques already, I'm just going to write some basic information into our Excel worksheet. So let's create a few basic column headings. Let's have a column heading that says mail sent, and then a column heading that says time, and then another column heading that says user. So we'll print out those 3 bits of information whenever somebody either sends or cancels sending an email. So back into the VB editor for this, and I'm going to put this at the bottom of my class module. So I don't want to write any extra information into my module 1, I'm going to add this to the class module. So if I scroll down to the bottom of there and then give myself a few blank lines, I can create a new private sub. So I'm going to call this private sub record status, something along those lines. And then nothing particularly complicated here. I would like to get from the bottom of column A in sheet 1 to the next available blank cell. So the way I'm going to do that is by saying sheet 1, which is the code name of this worksheet, so sheet 1 is the name listed there, followed by range a 1,048,576, which is the very last cell in the worksheet, and then, or the last row of the worksheet, dot end, XL up, and then dot offset 1, 0, dot value equals, and then I'm going to refer to the value of the mail sent variable, so mail sent, so that will put in either true or false. I'm not explaining in too much detail how this works because I've done it in many previous videos, so there's lots and lots of extra reference material for you to look at. I'm just going to copy and paste that line a couple of times just to make my life a little bit easier, and then just change the cell references here from column A to column B and then column C. And then the second column was supposed to record the time at which the email was sent, so I can use the now function to do that. And then finally I want to record the name of the user who sent it, so I can say environ user name. And again, these are techniques we've used in many other examples as part of this video series. All I really need to do now is make sure that I've commented out any debug.print statements, or I could delete them I suppose. And then I need to make a call to my record status subroutine. Now I want to make sure that I do that after I've changed the value of the mail sent variable, so mail sent equals true, and then I can just make a call to my record status procedure. You can press Control and space, again just to remind you of some of these basic techniques. Press Control and space to see a list of available procedures so you don't have to type out the whole thing yourself. Then I should do the exact same thing in the close event handler, so find where I've debug.printed earlier on, and then change or replace that with a call to my record status procedure. Okay, so having done that, all I should need to do now is head back to Excel, and then I could create a button I suppose using the toolbox here to insert a control button, but just for convenience I'm going to run this from my basic macros menu. So if I choose to create a new email and I choose to send this one, that says that was sent true by me at a particular time. If I just change the width of that column I'll be able to see that. And then if I go back to macros again and choose to run that procedure again, I can choose to close it this time. And I haven't chosen whether I definitely want to close it yet, so it hasn't written anything. If I choose yes, then that will print out that I didn't send the email that time. But if I run the macro again, and once again I can close it, but I don't want to discard it this time, let's send it instead, and so on and so on and so on. So you can test this in as many different ways as you like, just to make sure the entire system is indeed working. So, hope you've learned a few useful little tricks from part of that video. I guess the main thing, the thing that makes this entire thing possible, is the with events keyword. So that's key to this whole system working. Hope you found some of that useful anyway, and at least interesting. Thanks for watching, see you next time. If you like what you've seen here, why not head over to the WiseOwl website, where you can find loads more free resources, including these videos, some written blogs and tutorials, and even some exercises that you can download to practice your skills. Thanks for watching, see you next time.